screen, by the way.
Okay.
And 3, 2, 1, go, sir.
And welcome back to the County Commissioners Board work session for October 9, 2020. And we're continuing on with budget presentations. And this afternoon, we have the pleasure of having District Court, Prosecuting Attorney's Office, followed by Public Defense. So right now we're going to jump into District Court. And by way of introduction, if you're following along, I'm Commissioner John Hutchings, the chair of the board. We also have Vice Chair Commissioner Ty Menser, County Manager Ramiro Chavez, and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell and her well-known band of renown from her office. We also have Judge Buckley, and we have Jennifer Creighton, Administrator of the Court. So with that, I'm going to, did I miss anybody, Ramiro?
No, I think you got it covered, sir.
Oh, good, thank you. So I'm going to turn this over to Robin, I believe.
And I am going to welcome Judge Buckley and Jennifer and turn it straight over to them.
Perfect, there we go.
Robin, thank you very much. Commissioner Hutchings, Commissioner Menser, good afternoon. And in absentia, Commissioner Edwards, good afternoon. Jennifer, if you'll just put the first slide up.
Okay, I have shared my screen, so are all of you seeing it?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Should be good to go, Judge.
Yeah, okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, obviously you all know what district court is. I just thought I would share some arcane data, in some sense arcane. We serve about 20,000 people a year in various ways on infraction or criminal matters. We also hear about 5,000 civil cases a year and about 300 protection order cases. We break down these categories into a bunch of different smaller categories, and we've been doing that in the last 6 months because we're trying to figure out how best to triage our cases when we're looking at limited hearing time because of the COVID situation and long periods of time where we had the courthouse locked. One of the interesting statistics, at least from my point of view, was for the year 2019, Thurston County reported 1,007 DUIs. Of those 1,007 DUIs, 673, it was the person's first offense. 228 of them had one prior DUI. 70 of them had two prior DUIs. 26 of them had three prior DUIs. 5 had 4 prior DUIs. 3 had 5 prior to DUIs, and our 2 superstars had 6 prior DUIs. So, I guess the lesson from this is be careful when you're out on the roads and don't drink and drive. So I just thought those were interesting numbers and wanted to share those. They have no real relevance as to the budget issues, although, we will get into some DUI issues, but just thought those numbers are interesting. Next screen, Jennifer.
And before you move on, Judge, I'd like to point out the last line of your description of the court, I think is very, very important, and people miss that district court's the people's court, where as a citizen of Thurston County, you're most likely to be. As opposed to Superior Court.
Yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. I guess we just get used to it and don't even realize that these days. But if you have an issue with the court in Thurston County, you are most likely to have that issue handled in district court as opposed to any other judicial venue. And normally that means we get to see lots of citizens of Thurston County in various ways. And, one of the things that we've suffered with or through as district court is we miss seeing everybody because we are having very few in-person hearings, even once we unlock the door to the courthouse. And Obviously, that's because of the ongoing pandemic and our efforts to comply with all the recommendations of public health, which seem to make a lot of sense. And the primary one being, of course, that the fewer interpersonal occasions you have, the better chance you have of reducing transmission of the virus. So we have lots of interpersonal contacts via this platform and very few with people in court. And so I miss seeing our fellow citizens, but I'm not sure they necessarily miss seeing us. So it may cut different ways. But thank you for pointing that out. And we do serve a lot of people, and we pride ourselves on our ability to serve them efficiently and effectively, even in the face of a pandemic. This screen just shows the funds that we manage. We have both general fund and then treatment sales tax and trial court improvement monies that the court accesses for various obligations. The most used fund, obviously, is the general fund. If you'll note, up under FTEs, we're seeking additional FTEs that I'll discuss in a few minutes. And basically it shows a increase of 3. I'm going to tell you now, give you a little sneak preview, and that is we're only asking for 2. So we're going to drop 1 request as we get into it. And that would be on the treatment sales tax side of things. But the FTE count would be 3575, not 3375 if we were granted those authorized positions. One thing I just want to point out when we're looking at the funds managed by the court is that over the last 4 years, and we just picked the period of time in which Jennifer Creighton has been our court executive officer, the court has continued and probably improved on our approach of being good stewards of public money. We've finished every year in the last 4 years under budget. And we take very seriously the fiduciary role we have as receivers of public revenue, and we try our best to make the most effective use of those dollars. And I know you know that. Since we're on a hearing, I just wanted to share that information because that's something we do pride ourselves on. We are not overspenders under the theory that if we overspend, then you're going to give us more and then we'll get more. So that's not the approach we take.
I would add that not only for the last 4 years, but at least for the last 10 years, that has been the case for my entire tenure here.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah, I think that's.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah. All right, so our challenges. The obvious one is the one that we all face, and that is that we have this pandemic going on, and it's changed in so many ways the way all of us do our work, and obviously district court being one of those. And as I indicated, our primary goal in responding to the pandemic is to reduce transmission of the virus, which means we reduce as much as possible the interpersonal contacts that occur, except when they occur like this electronically. So our initial response to the virus was to lock the door of the courthouse. And the only hearings we conducted for the first few weeks were the jail video hearings where we had people arrested and in custody, and we had to handle those cases. All other cases were stopped at that point until we got a better handle on what an appropriate procedure would be. So we have gradually opened up starting in April and added additional hearings to our calendars. The way we triage the cases and decided which cases would come in would be to focus on the criminal cases where we have people in jail who wanted to get out of jail, people who don't want to go to jail. We have criminal hearings that we had to take care of. We had, all of those criminal hearings have a element of public safety to them that we have to address. So we gave those our primary importance. And the other types of hearings, the civil hearings that we gave of primary importance were protective order hearings. So those are the two types of hearings that we have focused on opening up. Civil dispute hearings are ones that are lower on that list, and we have not even really opened up a civil calendar, with the exception of the small claims calendar, which we now have been operating, I think, for about a month. We have opened up our hearings on small claims to allow those folks where they don't have lawyers on the case to come in and try to get those cases resolved. And we are also doing name change petitions, which surprisingly enough, there continue to be a very large number of folks seeking name changes. So we're doing name changes, small claims, and protection order hearings on the civil side, and we are doing our full panoply of hearings on the criminal side, with the exception of jury trials. And on the jury trial side of things, we are working with the county on a new space, which would be big enough to allow in-person trial, not a video trial. And the in-person trial would have 7 jurors and a judge and a clerk and the defense counsel and a prosecutor and a defendant and a witness. And we will have probably room for 6 well-spaced chairs in the space that we are working with, that would allow members of the public, the first 6 to show up, would get use of those chairs. It's important to note that that is necessary, because when we hopefully start in this space in November, the recording system we will have in place then will not allow us to live stream the jury trial. So the public access that's required under the Constitution will have to be in-person access, as opposed to the live streaming access that we now use for all of our criminal proceedings from the courthouse. And right now at the courthouse, the public is not allowed to come in. So we are open for counsel for parties, but we are not open for members of the public to come view the proceedings. And we satisfy our constitutional obligation for public access by broadcasting live on YouTube. And just as an aside, I would venture, my personal opinion is that by broadcasting or live streaming, we have in fact increased public access to these proceedings. People don't have to drive up to the courthouse, look for parking, find their way in, try to figure out which courtroom. They can go to our website and just click on one of the Zoom notices and open up to a courtroom. So I think we've really, it's something we've wanted to do for years and have talked about it, and the pandemic has now put us in the position of having to do it. And having done it, we've discovered that it's really an effective way to reach the members of our community and give them a window into what happens in the judicial branch of their government. So I think it's been a real positive that's come out of this, and one we intend to continue even when we can get people back in the courtroom. So back to jury trials, we hope to have a recording system starting in January that would allow us to live stream. We will then pick up live streaming, and whether we continue to have people come to the trial room to observe trials or not will depend on the current state of the pandemic, but we will have confidence that the public will have access to these proceedings once we can get back to live streaming. So right now, the pandemic and the lockdown, we have roughly 2,400 cases in backlog, and that number has grown since that number was calculated on the 10th of September. We're getting ready to open up what we call pretrial hearings, and we have a backlog of about 1,900 pretrial hearings. And that means criminal cases that are between the initial hearing of arraignment and then the final hearing of jury or disposition. Because we haven't run juries, lawyers don't seem to have enough incentive to close cases. So opening up the jury trial possibilities, hopefully for us, is going to get these cases to start moving. I want to point out one other thing. On Monday, we are going to have what Jennifer has coined as ghost court, which means nobody participating in a judicial proceeding on Monday will be present in the courthouse, to include staff and judges. I've been conducting a number of court hearings from where I am right now, which is at my house. My colleagues have yet to do that, and we will all do that on Monday. And we now are set up where we will have the ability to sign documents, because we are all each of us is going to have a signature pad at home, and we have PDF documents that are electronically provided to us, and we can sign and transmit back to the appropriate places. And we're doing this now. I've done it once already, where the clerk and I, neither one of us were in the courtroom and nobody else was, and we were successful in that. We're now going to do it across a wider range of calendars. And the idea here is we want to be ready in case we face a similar issue in the coming winter months that we did last year, which is all of a sudden we just had to lock the doors because the virus transmission was so high. So if we face that issue again, or if there's some other reason that we have to do that, we're going to have experience in how to conduct court from remote locations where nobody is at the courthouse. And, that has real interesting ramifications. But the technology that we have learned to use has given us the ability to contemplate doing this, and we're looking forward to seeing how Monday goes. Next slide, Jennifer. These are our general fund policy proposals, and number one is a proposal to add an FTE for in-house technical support to district court to deal with all the technology issues that are created by and our current use of technology and our increasing dependence on it. And I'm going to ask Jennifer to sort of run through the need for that position. Jennifer?
Thank you, Judge. Before I start, I would just like to take this chance, since we have everybody in the virtual room, to say a big thank you to Denise and Olivia and Patty, our budget team. They are infinitely patient, infinitely kind, and I appreciate them very, very much. So our first request is for in-house IT support. And I want to be clear that this request is not a reflection on the work that our IT department does. It's more a reflection of the needs of the court and our increasing reliance on technology. Even before the pandemic, we were becoming more and more reliant on technology with our electronic documents, the audiovisual, having the streaming from the jail, all kinds of different things. And then once the pandemic hit, we really took that opportunity to jump in and add a lot more technology to our processes. As the judge said, we're doing Ghost Court on Monday. What that means is that the staff here have figured out how to do all of the work from home. So a clerk sitting in her living room can actually turn on the recording equipment in the courtroom, do all of the recording, turn on the live stream. She can do everything from there. We had another clerk who did the research to figure out how to transfer the phones from the phone through the PC so that the customer service clerks can actually answer phones from home. So everybody can be at home. But this reliance on technology is becoming more critical because, as the judge explained with the live streaming and closing court, we have a constitutional requirement to have open court, and we've answered that by doing the live streaming. And when that goes down, we need someone who is in the house that we can just turn around and say, go fix it. And we don't have that right now. And that's just one example of what we need. We had the live streaming go down on Monday. And after an hour and a half trying to find somebody in the IT department, my deputy administrator finally just called the vendor himself because we just couldn't get any response. And that's just not something that we can put up with. We really need to have that response right away. And as I said, it was my deputy administrator. My deputy administrator and my fiscal manager are my two highest paid employees. And they're the ones who are spending between 30 and 70% of their time right now doing technical work. And, you know, the 70% is high, and that's a result of the pandemic. But even before that, they were spending a good 25 to 30% of their time on technical issues. And that's not what they're paid to do. So we really need to get someone in who can do that for us and can do it for us reliably. Not only are they, you know, doing something that they're not supposed to be, well, not they're not supposed to be, it's not in their job description, but that means there's a lot of things that we aren't getting done because they are so busy with the others. Our records requests are falling woefully behind. We trained the fiscal manager in lean processing, and he has not yet had an opportunity to start putting that into practice. One of the things we are not doing electronically are civil forms because, again, the fiscal manager hasn't had the time to take those forms and put them into an electronic format. So there's some really systemic things that aren't happening because these gentlemen are spending all of their time on the IT issues. One thing the judge didn't mention is that when we do start having our jury trials, we're going to be doing voir dire completely remotely. So instead of bringing in 20 to 30 people and putting them in a room together, we're having them appear from home so that they're not having that exposure to one another. And also, so we don't need as much space to rent. So we're saving the county money by having a smaller footage requirement. But if we're going to rely on doing voir dire remotely, we need someone who's going to be there and can fix things not only for the court, but when one of the people dialing in has some trouble, we need somebody who can help them at the same time as well. So it's just more and more important that we have this this person that is a district court employee that we can rely on at any time. Are there any questions about that?
Any questions yet, commissioners? Or Commissioner, or Robin Romero?
Yes, I have
Okay.
just.
Go ahead.
Oh,
It's on topic. It may not be. It's more of my curiosity, maybe as a former practitioner in front of district court. But what is the line from your perspective, Judge, taking live testimony in a fact-finding situation like an evidentiary hearing or a trial, the line between what can be done remote virtually and what can't in your view, or is the line somewhere else? Or have you got that all dialed up in your head?
Commissioner Mentor, it's an excellent question. That's one we've been, going back and forth on since we recognized the limitations of not having people in the courtroom. So the compromise we've come to on jury trials is we believe that there's really no degradation of any due process rights by selecting juries remotely. And it goes a long way to making our citizens feel comfortable with being willing to participate in the process. When I talk to people and say, so what would you think if you got a jury summons now? There's just this level of fear about, do we have to gather in a room with with a lot of people and sit inside for an extended period of time as we go through all the questioning, and lots of people are talking, and that's just not a recipe that comports with what the CDC or Thurston County Public Health says is a good place. So our willingness to do this virtual voir dire addresses, in my mind, the biggest issue. So we can get our jury picked and we'll have 7 jurors. And so we can go from 21 jurors down to 7 without 14 people having to come to court at all. So then when we start the jury the next day, those 7 will come. Everything else will be done in court. So, the testimony will be there. The jurors will see them. When somebody's testifying, they will be allowed to unmask so that you can see facial expression and those sorts of things. But everybody else will remain masked in there. I don't think right now there's a degree of comfort with the video process that would allow us to get into evidentiary hearings on criminal cases. Now, we have conducted evidentiary hearings on protection order cases. In fact, our very first, when we reopened up our protection order hearings, the first one that happened, coincidentally, was a respondent that was in the state of Tennessee. And so Commissioner Wold did the hearing, and the people were able to file their documents with the court prior to the hearing, and they put them in an electronic file, which both parties have access to. Worked really well, and able to conduct a hearing with a petitioner who was at the petitioner's home in Thurston County, the respondent who was at the respondent's home in Tennessee, and the court sitting in the courtroom, and everybody looking at exhibits that were great. And the court had no problem reaching a determination, even though there weren't people to look at in a courtroom. So I think in the long run, we will be moving in that direction. In the criminal side, where you have, I guess, more stringent constitutional standards because of the risk that somebody, the losing party may go to jail. So the court has to be a little bit more careful there. We're going to be slower in getting to that point. If I were to look 10 years down the road, I would say, yeah, we're going to see a lot more video testimony in criminal proceedings. I just think it's going to take some time. And I can tell you that the lawyers are very nervous about having to do voir dire virtually. And the judges are committed to the fact that, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to take this step forward. And, there are other courts in the state that are doing it. Not many, but there are others. And I see no reason that we shouldn't be out there learning how to do this. So I hope that answered your question.
It does. I mean, for the most part, I wasn't sure if maybe, some judges might take even a more conservative. I think right at the beginning of the pandemic, I heard some reluctance to take a change of plea, not be able to look at the defendant in the eye for the making sure they understood their plea. And I wasn't sure about that. And then the voir dire is interesting. I wouldn't have any problem conducting the voir dire as an attorney virtually. I would just be concerned that some folks without computer access, if there'd be, you'd be changing the composition of the pool because of lower socioeconomic status and lack of access to but I mean, that's a different issue that's not on today's topic, but that'd be my only concern about that.
Yeah, and that also is an excellent concern. And our initial layout to the lawyers addressed that issue because what we recognize is that we need to maintain the ability of everybody to potentially be a juror. So the notice to a juror would say, if you don't have the technology to do this, or if where you live doesn't have connectivity, you can come to the courthouse. We will provide you with a private room and a laptop, and you can participate in the jury selection process that way. And that way we don't have anybody in a room with them, so there's no transmission issues, and they have the ability to come in and log in. So I think that's a really important issue, and I think it's one that we have a solution for. I don't see that getting in the way of being able to do what we want to do.
Good, thank you.
Yep. Commissioner Edwards has joined us. Do you have any questions, Gary?
Well, not as much of a question as I do a sympathetic ear, I guess, having lived through this exact same thing that was explained about coming up with enough IT support. And so I'm very concerned about that. Having been in your shoes in a different job some years back. And so I'm looking forward to having discussions with the county manager about this as we move forward. But I just want to say I know what you're talking about. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge, for setting this whole thing up and framing it. And that was a nice segue into Jennifer's piece. But my questions are about that as well. Because you talked about, you're not sure, I think it was, I'm not going to quote you because I can't, about not being set up for recording by January 2021, or you hope to be. Is that IT related, or what's the cause of that?
That's our new recording system, JAVS. We will have a portable recorder that will allow us to meet our obligations to record the proceedings, which we have to. We can't conduct a proceeding. It's not being recorded on the criminal side. But we won't have the ability to live stream it.
And would you explain the acronym JAV?
JAVS, that's just a company name, Jennifer.
Judicial Audio Visual System. And
Okay.
Commissioner, the fact that we won't have live streaming in November is mostly a pipeline issue. The vendor is very backed up, and putting in a portable system is a much simpler process than the whole system we need to do the live streaming and the recording, the visual recording, which they can do for us after the first of the year.
Okay, because you state the need for the court being exceptionally self-reliant, or having had to be very well. But when you also said the public records request, the PDRs, that's what's woefully behind?
Yes.
Is that because of IT, or is that a
No, it's, well,
staffing issue and COVID and?
it's a staffing issue, and it's a staffing issue that predates COVID because I've got the person who's responsible for doing that, the deputy administrator, is spending such a significant amount of time doing IT response within the court that he doesn't have the time he needs to get to all of those records requests.
Okay. And this question is then for Robin, and that is, what other departments or offices have in-house IT? Prosecutor?
So I know about the prosecutor. The sheriff's office has in-house IT. We moved toward, a few of our elected official offices have in-house IT. But a few years ago, you may recall that we had a conversation with elected officials and department directors, and the county took the first step toward going to Romero could probably talk better about this,
Yeah.
but
I can probably
you jump in.
I can probably chime in. You may recall when we were looking at forming the IT department, one of the efforts was the consolidation of all the IT personnel into the IT organization. From the organizational point of view, that makes sense. And we have embedded IT personnel to some offices and departments. And for instance, Superior Court had an IT person, a staff member, I think it was 2 years ago, where we have an MOU outlining the roles and responsibilities of that IT person. Because for me, and at least from my point of view, it is essential that we have a consistent approach as to how we maintain all the IT systems in the county. And that was the intent of making sure that we have one leader, that will be Dennis, to provide that guidance from the IT perspective. So, and those are the parameters in which we are currently operating. Public Works has a couple of embedded IT, but the same, that is under the direction and guidance from the IT point of view of Dennis. Anyways, I just want to provide that a little bit of an umbrella in terms of background information.
All right,
Right.
thank you.
We also have the, one of our cybersecurity positions is embedded in the auditor's office. And the way it works is the person reports day to day and has their desk and their computer and all their equipment. They are actually in the office or department that they're embedded in. But there's the organizational structure they report to Dennis. So we're trying to make that work, and that is an option that you might consider here.
And I
Okay.
don't think we're opposed to that option. The bigger concern is that they are dedicated to district court, and I understand needing to keep all of the systems as standard as possible, and that's the reason for having them being an IT employee embedded in the office. One thing that I forgot to mention is that the other thing we need is someone who can liaise with the state court administrator, because we have systems that they own that we access, and our IT department isn't familiar with those, nor should they be. But if we had an IT person dedicated to district court, that would make a lot of those processes a lot easier as well. So whether they are an IT employee or a district court employee, I think is sort of immaterial as long as we know that they are ours for directing the work.
Right. You can't wait an hour and a half to be able to get a hold of them.
Exactly.
Right.
No, and so you made that point very, very clear. So good discussion. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, I'll just weigh in on the backside of that. From a judicial standpoint, we've had a number of occasions where something's happened, and so I can see in the hallway the judge and the clerk waiting for one of the two IT specialists who aren't IT specialists to come in and try to solve a problem, and everything else is at a standstill. So no work can be done while we're trying to get that figured out. Usually it ends up being a relatively short period of time, but upon occasion it's been more extended, and it is problematic. And, since we're broadcasting everything live on YouTube, the public sees what's happening, and it's not a good look if we have to say, I'm sorry, but we are not capable of going forward until we get this resolved. And we're just in this, black hole of delay for a while. So having somebody present is the biggest need. And then I think Jennifer alluded to the other, and if it's within IT now is fine, but we just need to make sure that the qualifications of that person are such that they meet the needs for a court-centered person. And whether that means Jennifer participates in the hiring process or at least provides, the standards like AOC, understanding of AOC, technology, whatever, but we would want to make sure that that person has the skills to meet the need.
That makes perfect sense to me. Okay.
All right. Number 2 on the general fund policy request, and this is one I've made before, and Jennifer's just sort of reframed it. Basically, this is asking for $500,000 to essentially fund UAs for our probationers and mental health court and veterans court participants, although they're funded by treatment sales tax, so I guess I shouldn't lump those two together. So probationers basically, and occasionally some pretrial folks. And it goes back to those numbers I was telling you about the DUIs. One of the things we do to keep people out of jail is to actively monitor alcohol use, and we try not to keep people in jail, try to keep them out, but when they're out, particularly as we get down into those numbers of people who have their third or fourth or fifth or sixth DUI, we're going to be concerned about them drinking while they're under conditions of the court. So we need some way of monitoring that. I had suggested in the past that I thought it would be great if the county just bought scram devices, which, we would make somebody wear if they met certain or raised certain levels of concern with the court. And the problem with doing that, however, is somebody has to get the information, the downloads from these scram devices. They are electronic devices that somebody would wear on their ankle that measures alcohol through skin perspiration. And it's a 24/7 monitoring. And if they drink, then, when the information is downloaded every certain number of hours, you're going to have information about that. But like a security camera, it needs somebody on the back end of it to see it and to report it. So if we were to get scram devices, we would need, probably a low-level sort of ministerial FTE to take the information and then send it to the appropriate people who need to act on it. The other option, and that's how this one is framed, is, okay, if we don't have scram devices, which we do not have at this point, and there's a reluctance to add an FTE, then we could use the money to fund urinalysis tests for people, and we could sign a contract with, for example, one of our local labs. And I know Cordon Lab, for instance, who does most of the UA testing that we see, has indicated that even though I believe they're headquartered in Puyallup, they would open up an Olympia office if this were to happen. We could send our folks over there for UAs and they wouldn't have to pay. Now, not having to pay is important because the vast majority of our people have significant financial issues. And one of the big things we hear all the time is, I went to do my UA, but they wanted, $50 or $35 or $70, depending on what type of UA was demanded, and I don't have it. So that's been an issue that we struggle with a lot. You don't want to put somebody in jail because they don't have the money to do a UA, but you don't want to give up on monitoring either because we have to maintain public safety. So this is something we've struggled with. Technology has certainly helped, but we put a lot of people on Scram, and then 1 month later, because Scram costs them $15 a day, which is expensive, they come back in and say, can you take this off, please? Because I'm going broke. I can't afford to pay for my treatment. All kinds of other things. So we're trying to come up with different alternatives, and this is our shot at it right now. So that's what this proposal number 2 would get at.
Judge, will you explain the acronym SCRAM for the public, please?
I don't know what SCRAM means. SCRAM is a transdermal alcohol monitoring system. And it's like an EHM bracelet. It looks exactly the same, and you wear it on your ankle, and it measures skin perspiration, and alcohol is exuded from the body through perspiration, and it would measure that and then report it as whether, at what level it's coming out. And it's not precise as to level, but the trigger is it over 0.02, which we would find to be something more than incidental alcohol contact. So with that in mind, I'm reading the statement of need, and treatment providers don't provide random UAs, and the jail is not conducting UAs. So my question to you is, should they be? We used to depend on them. We would send them over to the jail for UAs, but that's a resource issue for them, and sometimes there'd probably be a pretty good lineup of folks needing UAs. So the jail would be one place. Drug court does UAs, and we send our treatment court folks over to drug court for UAs, and we use treatment sales tax funds to reimburse drug court for the cost of doing those UAs. And for our participants, what we do is we tell them, okay, you have to do community service hours to pay us back for the cost that we are paying to drug court. So even though we don't get any money in from the defendant, we are at least letting them know that they have certain community obligations to meet through these community service hours in order to pay for the UAs that are required because of their situation. So, and that works fine, but I'm told the drug court is at its limit as far as our ability to send folks over to them for UAs. So to extend it outside of the therapeutic courts and to the rest of our criminal calendar would add more work than drug court says they can take on right now. So if what you wanted to do was, give more money to drug courts so that they could do UAs for, all the potential users in the Thurston County criminal system, that's fine too. We don't need to be the ones owning this system. I would just like to get over the hurdle of people who can't afford to be monitored, being monitored, because the other option is just to put them in jail. And if we're talking, $120 a day to put them in jail because I can't monitor them on the outside, that begins to weigh pretty quickly too. So that's kind of the rock and the hard place we're between right now.
I just have two quick questions. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer. Then I've got two quick questions before I turn it over.
Commissioner, I just wanted to say that the jail has always been very helpful, but the problem there is a couple of things. Number one is that they don't really have the staffing to do it. And sometimes we would send people over and something's happened at the jail or there's something going on and they can't free someone up. Also, you have to have the tester has to be the same gender as the person being tested, and we can't always guarantee that that's happening at the jail. And the other thing with the jail is they're not completely randomized. So by going with a contractor or going with drug court, we can guarantee a randomization of the UAs, which is the really key component to making sure that those are doing the job that we need them to do.
Well, the judge offered, not offered, but he proffered if the county owned some scram devices, we own EHM, don't we? The electric home monitoring devices. And I don't know how expensive, you don't have to answer this, but that might be an option. But is this something, since it's substance abuse related, that TST would fund?
I think TST would say, unless they are funding it for folks in mental health court where there's co-occurring disorder. But for somebody who's just there on a DUI and it doesn't have that mental health component to it, I don't think they would find it under the standards set forth in the TST statute.
Okay.
But yeah, and we did an estimate. I asked Jennifer, I said, okay, so if we ask for scram devices, how many? And we think if we had 85 scram devices, that would probably meet our need for folks who are put on scram but truly can't afford to pay for it. And that would give us a lot more flexibility of saying, oh no, don't worry about it. Go get your scram because we're going to pay for it, but I want you on scram. And it just, it allows us not to have to look at putting them in jail because we can't monitor them otherwise. And so, down the road, there would be savings on that, but it would certainly allow us to do a much better job of monitoring those folks for potential consumption.
Do we have a price per scram unit, a couple $100 or so, or do we know?
I have no idea. Now, I also want to point out the downside of the scram as opposed to the UAs is that the scram measures only alcohol consumption. So if somebody's issue is marijuana, or somebody's issue is methamphetamine or heroin or other opioid drugs, they're not going to show up on a scram device.
Okay.
So UAs are also an issue there. But we're trying to get as creative as we can in looking at this.
Got that. Go ahead, Ty.
Yesterday, we heard a proposal from pretrial services to expand to cover district court. And I wanted to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about it anyway, how important you thought that would be to your business. But now that you've raised this issue, I want to also hear how, if we funded that, how would that connect to this request? Would pretrial services be able to help with, but I mean, they still need money for alcohol testing, or how would that fit together?
That's a great question. And, Marianne Clear, who runs pretrial services, of course, used to be the director for district courts, therapeutic courts. And so Marianne and I worked together for a long time. And in fact, pretrial used to be housed in district court, and then it was sent over to Superior Court as part of budget reductions in 2008, and with the understanding that they would not serve district court any longer because of those budget reductions. So what we miss is we don't have anybody pre-trial. Now, we do have probation for post-trial, but for folks who are pre-trial that can't access probation, we don't have anybody for them to report to. We don't have any monitoring that they respond to. So what Marianne's folks could do, for example, if we had the scram devices, that could be where the scram information goes to. And they would then report it back to the court if somebody that they have on pretrial monitoring is showing a positive off of a scram device. Marianne's folks could order UAs for people if in the reporting have a reasonable belief that the person is using. And sometimes that's fairly obvious. You can tell just either by how they smell or how they look, that there may be use going on. And that would be a basis for them to order the person to get a UA, and then they could report the result back. So having pretrial monitoring would be a big benefit to us, Commissioner Menser, one that we haven't had, but would allow us to do certain things. I know Marianne has talked about the ability of her folks, if we had this pretrial monitoring, to screen our DV folks to make sure they are showing an address different than the address of the protected party on a no contact order. So we take it one more step down the road of trying to make sure that people aren't living together in violation of these orders. they are, I'm part of the pretrial work group that's going on. There's a lot of talk about the risk assessment that's being developed, and that could be adjusted for DUI issues and DV issues in district court. And another potential thing would be to do indigency screening for appointment of counsel. And, those are a lot of different duties that pretrial services could take on, all of which we are doing ourselves right now to, some or lesser degree of completeness and effectiveness. Somebody who has more time, like a pretrial service officer, may be able to do a more effective job of that.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like, to kind of sum up what you just said, is that there would be some overlap but not complete overlap in any sense. I mean, if we expanded pretrial services, there'd still be a need for what you're asking for in terms of money for UAs, for the probationer. So, for example, or folks that Marianne's team recommended for monitoring, and that would be an additional cost that would fit into your priority 2 request here. Is that a good summation?
That's an excellent summation. We would still need the cost for the defendants who can't afford the UAs, but having pretrial services, one, it would probably reduce our need to order some of those because we know they're reporting in. And so right now our folks don't report to anybody pretrial. And so that would reduce that need a little bit. And then also they would be the person for whom that information would come, and then they would disperse it to the appropriate, whether it's the prosecutor's office or the court, to act on it. So they would fill that need where you could do the UAs without adding an FTE or do a scram without adding an FTE because you've done it through pretrial services.
Okay.
Okay, Gary, do you have any questions or comments?
Well, the only thing I'd mention at this point, it seems like I've heard the same information 30 years ago. And I can tell you that I think we need to start looking at contracting possibly. And I don't know the whys or why nots on going out to contract with a vendor, maybe through WASPIC or something like that. But I think that's for another discussion, but I realize there is a need there, so thank you.
Okay, so am I going back to you, Judge Buckley, or am I going to Jennifer? We have 2 more presentations after this one, so we got to step it up a bit now.
Yep, let's go to our treatment sales tax slide, and number 2, you can just cross that off. That's the one we are withdrawing. We received the standards that the treatment sales tax board used to review these, and they determined that our policy number 2 does not comport with their standards. So we recognize that and we'll withdraw that request. So the one we're talking about then is number 1, and number 1 was not recommended by the treatment sales tax board, but I think it's important, and so I wanted to bring it before the commissioners, and that is to add a second mental health oriented probation officer in our probation department. We currently have one that you authorized I think it's just finishing first year, Jennifer, is that correct?
Second year. They authorized it 2 years ago.
Okay, we're finishing our second year on that. And that person specializes in handling people who've been convicted of crimes who have mental health issues that contribute to the commission of their crime. That sounds a lot like folks who are eligible for mental health court. But as you all know, in mental health court, just based on our court time and our staffing, we have a cap to the number of people, and that cap is at 55 who can participate in mental health court and veterans court combined. So some people don't make it into those courts, but that doesn't mean they don't have mental illness. They do. And having a probation officer who is familiar with those needs and can work with them in a more intense way that is important for these folks is really effective. And we found really good results from our current mental health probation officer. Adding another would help address what we all recognize, I think, as a rather large need. If we look at folks who suffer from mental illness, and if they are non-compliant and the only thing we can do is lock them up, it costs even more money. It's, I think that right now, probably $140 a day to house somebody with active mental illness in the jail, as opposed to the folks who are incarcerated there who don't have active mental illness. So it's more expensive to house them. If we can keep them in probation, keep them working with somebody who understands them and has them in effective treatment modalities, that allows us to not have them in jail and allows the defendant to make more progress in addressing their needs. So it's been a real success as far as we're concerned, after 2 years, and adding another position would make a lot of sense.
Gary, any questions?
No, sir.
Ty, any further questions? Nor do I. This is a very comprehensive briefing, so thank you very much. Thank you, Judge Buckley. Thank you, Jennifer. Do you have any questions of us or staff?
I just want to thank all of you for your time and thank the prosecutor's office and the defense counsel for their patience. I started to use up all their time.
No, you didn't use up all the time. You're fine. You're very fine. Thank you, Judge. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, everybody.
Your Honor.
Good seeing you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Robin, do we need to break for the prosecutor to get in, or is he in line?
Let me check.
Or in the queue?
They're waiting. In their presentation doesn't start until in 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Okay, let's take a 4-minute break. 3-minute break. Be back in 3 minutes. Thank you.
In 3, 2, 1, you're ready to go. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. We're continuing on with the budget presentation. This one is on from the prosecuting attorney's office. And we have prosecuting attorney John Thunheim with us, Christy Peters, Elizabeth Petrich, Susan Strong, and Heidi Prohoda. So thank you all for joining us, and you're off and running.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about our 2021 budget proposal.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
I want to let you know, if I didn't, that this is being live streamed as well. So if you have acronyms, please explain the acronyms to the public.
I will. And if I forget to do that, if I use an acronym and forget, please interrupt me so that I can change that. I'll try to avoid it.
I will, LOL.
I wish I could say that I was coming to you from Lawson Volcanic National Park, which is where the photograph in my background is, but I'm really not, as proficient Zoom users know. But this is a photograph I took during my my motorcycle trip this summer that I thought I'd share with everybody. I want to start off with today with just kind of some big picture comments, just to give you all context of how we're approaching the 2021 budget. And I want to say initially that we're approaching it, I hope, with the same caution that the board is as well. And I know that you are, because there's so many unknowns out there right now in terms of the impacts of our budget from COVID. So we've been what I would say is very frugal in terms of what we've proposed here, in terms of trying to minimize any kind of expansion of our budget, and knowing that we are doing a one-year budget, as we've talked about, to let some of these unknowns play out so that we have a better sense going into 2022 what the financial picture for the county looks like. I say that because I guess I want you to know that when we started 2020, when we started this year in January, I started having conversations with the county manager about doing some reorganization in my office that was an opportunity from some vacancies that we had and so forth. And we started kind of talking generally about strategy in that regard. And eventually I wanted to put together some kind of a package for the board that I would have been bringing to you today as part of the 2021 proposal that I've elected not to bring because, again, there's so much uncertainty. So this is in my view, a very base budget, a very basic budget for 2021. But I wanted to give you all kind of the sense that in 2021, depending on the financial picture, I anticipate we may be bringing to you a little bit more robust, for lack of a better word, decision package to help us with some reorganizing that we want to do in the future. All right, so that's kind of big picture. The slide format asks us to start with our mission statement here. This has been a mission statement for us for a number of years, focuses on several of our core values and essentially our how we perceive our primary public mission to the public. When you see the words highly skilled and innovative, those are referring to several of our core values around being the best that we can be in terms of our legal skills, our professional skills, all of those kinds of things. Innovative, is obviously this focus on being open to new ideas, searching for better ways to do business, more effective ways to do business. And I know that everybody on this in this meeting knows that we're involved in a number of conversations going on around innovative opportunities in the legal system, particularly the criminal justice system. In terms of our public mission, or our criminal mission, we're really looking for to be advocates for public safety and justice. And the way I articulate this to my deputy prosecutors is really two main responsibilities, and that is to protect the community and to hold people accountable to the rule of law. but we do that in a way that also accounts for the fact that public safety can mean other things than just conviction or confinement. And that goes back to our emphasis on looking for innovative and new ways to do business. We also represent the interests of children. That refers to our family support program, where we represent the child, not either of the parents, when it comes to child support and family support. And then, of course, the high quality legal services to county government refers to the function and mission of our civil division, which strives to provide the board and all of the other elected officials in county departments with the best legal services that we can provide with the resources that we have. So that's our mission statement that I think captures the fact that we are a multi-missioned office that is involved in a lot of different undertakings. In terms of the funds that we manage, of course, we'll look first at the general fund. And what I want to point out to you is that at the end of the day, we are actually presenting to you a proposal, a 2021 budget proposal that is a reduction from our 2020 approved budget as it exists right now. It's not a significant reduction, so I don't want to overstate that. It's only, a little less than $50,000. So it's, we're not talking about big money reductions. But I wanted to point out the fact that we're not here asking for more, and that we are actually asking for or proposing a budget that really is status quo, hold the line. You may notice in this that it does anticipate, however, a slight increase in our FTEs, and that's because we were able to use some of our savings from some turnover that occurred during 2020 to actually add to our FTE count without adding to our budget. And so that's why those two numbers, while it first appears that our workforce is growing slightly, which it is, doesn't require us to ask for an additional budget from the general fund. In the other two funds, the Victim Advocate Fund, I want to point out to you that as we were looking at this, we have revised our projections significantly for the Victim Advocate Fund, and this is based on looking at new revenue projections and then actually we had an error in our proposed expenditures that I want to just take a minute to point out. So we're actually estimating a 2021, well, I should say an ending fund balance for 2020, which you could characterize as a beginning fund balance 2021 at $451,000. And our revenue projections are at $713,000. Now, a year ago or 2 years ago, one of the things that significantly helped us in that regard is the legislature passed a bill that authorized all of the victim penalty assessment money that's paid by folks who are convicted of crimes in this county. They pay a victim penalty assessment. All of that money now goes to support victim advocacy through this fund. And so we actually experienced a fairly good increase in revenue. And historically in the past, only a portion of that money had been dedicated to our fund. We are proposing an addition in expenses now to $742,000. I'll get to that in a little bit more detail because one of our policy level requests is to continue a legal assistant position that's funded out of that fund to support our victim advocates and our victim advocacy program. But that being said, then our beginning fund balance for 2021, if we fill the position and we have that position full through the entire year, still comes out at $422,000, which in my view is still a very healthy fund balance. Those are different than the numbers that you had. Go ahead, Robin.
I just wanted to say, this is a fund that I know we'd been struggling with in the past, and to see it stable now is just a really great thing. So I appreciate the management that it took to get us there.
Yeah.
Well,
The windfall
I-
too from the legislature, woohoo! But
yes, I was going to say,
management.
yeah, I appreciate the compliment. We are managing it very closely, and it was a huge help to us when the legislature changed that funding stream for us in terms of funding our program. I think it's important for everybody to realize that our entire victim advocacy program, all the FTEs in our victim advocacy program, are funded out of this fund. So right now, we're not using any general fund money at all to fund employees that are part of our victim advocacy program. So I think you should just know that in terms of there's zero impact on the general fund when I talk about this. The anti-profiteering fund, I'm just going to mention this. This is a fund that exists from a statute that's been around for a long time. Many years ago, our office had an anti-profiteering, and just for the folks at home that may not know what that is, that's Washington State's equivalent to what's commonly called a RICO, or a racketeering case. We had a case that was an anti-profiteering case that we ultimately prevailed on, and we had about $25,000 that was put into this fund as a result of this. This is a fund that is specifically for the proceeds from that particular kind of case. But it's a restricted fund, and that the money can only be used to fund additional efforts on future anti-profiteering cases. In this county, those cases come, they're few and far between, so they don't come up very often. So we haven't really had any opportunity to expend that money. Nonetheless, we always want to put a placeholder in there because we want to have some of that fund available should a case like that come up, and we can use it for both prosecution costs, or we could use it for investigative costs. So for instance, if our drug task force were to initiate an anti-profiteering case or a criminal racketeering case, we could potentially use that fund. But again, that doesn't impact the general fund at all, and I just wanted you to know what that money is for and the fact that it's restricted. As was requested, we've laid out a number of challenges that we face in 2021. The first three I kind of all lumped together in terms of an inadequacy of resources. And I don't say that from a position of being of any way being critical or anything like that. This is the nature of what we face right now. We've had cases coming in, the inability to prosecute them because of the court closures during COVID. And so the cases are building up, and that is something I wanted you to know in terms of background. We have about 500 cases that have come in since the 1st of April at last count that we haven't been able to take any action on because of the COVID restrictions in the courts. And that continues to grow. That's one of our huge unknowns for 2021 because we don't know how quickly we're going to be able to continue to open the courts up. Once we get back to full capacity in the courts, depending on when that is, I'm going to give you just this is really just an experience-based estimate, nothing more, that it'll probably take us the better part of a year to catch up. Absent some kind of drastic action, like just basically declining to file charges in a significant group of cases. All of those options will be on the table, obviously, but that's a challenge that we are facing. The challenge also has come up in the civil division because as all of the offices and departments have undertaken changes that they've needed to make that are COVID related, they've turned to us for legal advice and representation during that process. So our civil division also has seen an increase in the demand for their work on the civil side of it. Other pieces of this are things that basically have been continuing challenges in the criminal justice system. The fact that we continue to have a high number of cases that have a nexus to substance use disorder, mental illness, domestic violence is on the rise. It's not as prominent in our county as it has been in other counties, but I'm still anticipating that it will continue to increase as the COVID pandemic lingers on. And we have seen a significant rise in the number of referrals on child abuse and neglect cases, which is very concerning for me in terms of our public safety mission. So we're paying close attention to that. The other thing that's happened is with the substantial increase in the number of involuntary treatments. On my slide, you see that acronym ITA. That is an acronym for Involuntary Treatment Act. These are folks who are detained because they are a danger to themselves or others because of a mental illness or a mental disease that they're dealing with. Because we have more facility space in this county opening up, the number of cases that we're handling under that provision are increasing dramatically. And so that is something I may need to come back in 2021 and revisit in terms of an increased need for capacity to do those cases. We continue to give public records support. Those requests continue to come in to the county, and in some instances, we continue to experience increases in that area. And really just this idea of the overall impact that COVID has on the well-being of our office. And that's something that I've really taken on a big emphasis on with this year, is trying to keep my team engaged and moving forward and optimistic about the future, because that can be difficult when we're dealing with some of the things we're dealing with right now. Here's our policy requests that are been submitted. Again, I say this, they're submitted as policy level proposals, but without significant impact to the general fund. The first one is one that you've actually seen before. For years, we've been trying to find an opportunity to essentially make a correction in our civil division.
Have that policy level sheet?
So that our civil team, the FTEs in our civil team reflects what we actually have. So for right now, we still have two positions, two FTEs in our civil division that are on the books at 3/4 time or less. One of them is Elizabeth Petrich's position as the chief civil deputy, because prior to her promotion to chief civil deputy, she was working in a part-time position, and we've never been able to get that corrected since then. This year in particular, I think we've got the opportunity to do it. And so I'm going to ask you again to consider this proposal. And the reason is because we had the savings that we experienced from our turnover. We can now apply that to try to get those FTEs whole again. So we've got two positions in the civil division that we'll be asking to bring to full funding. Not full, I shouldn't say full funding. Yes, full funding, but more importantly to a full FTE, which is what they're already working. So essentially it makes their full-time equivalent match reality.
Thank you.
The second request is a change in the Victim Advocate Fund. A little bit earlier this year, we actually sought and received approval to add a legal assistant position into this fund. Strategically, what we're doing is we're trying to provide some administrative support to our victim advocates so that they can focus the bulk of their time on doing direct service to victims. There's lots of administrative work that goes along with it, communicating with people, setting up appointments and interviews and things like that. getting letters out to people, keeping victims informed of what's going on in their cases, that kind of thing. Lots of tasks that can be done at that legal assistant with a legal assistant position that the advocates are doing for themselves right now. And so we made that proposal and it was approved. And then, of course, with the COVID restrictions, we have decided not to move forward in filling that until we get a little bit further into 2021. So I'm asking for this FTE, the end date on this FTE to be extended or removed, anticipating we probably won't even fill this until a little bit longer into 2021 when we start to attack the backlog of cases that we are dealing with to try to help the advocates also deal with the increase in the workload that they'll experience once that starts to happen. So this is kind of a proactive request on our part. That being said, again, this position would be funded out of the Victim Advocate Fund and not the general fund. So there would be no general fund impact, and we'll continue to manage it within the parameters of what the Victim Advocate Fund, the Victim Fund, can afford to do. So that's why we probably won't fill it right away. We'll probably wait until we get into 2021 a little bit further and we get a better sense of what our Victim Advocate Fund revenues look like post-COVID. That's all the slides I had, and that's really the presentation, other than to say strategically, we're trying to be as frugal as possible to really partner with you to get through this COVID as well as we can financially, understanding all of the unknowns that are there. And we want to be that partner with you to do that. And we understand the challenges that you have, and that's why we proposed the budget that we have. And that being said, when we get beyond COVID, if we do have a better financial picture, I do plan to come back and to give you, I think, a strategic proposal about how to reorganize our office to make us more efficient, more effective. I'd love to answer questions.
Well, I have a request of Rob, and then I have a question for you, John, or for Christy. The request from Robin, the PowerPoint isn't included in our notebooks. Can we get copies of that?
It came separate in a separate packet. It didn't make it into the binder.
we should have a different copy on your desk outside of your binder.
Oh, there it is.
With 11 by 11 by 17 sheets on their 10-year financial plan.
Yeah, with a big giant stack of papers all around it, so I didn't see it.
Oh,
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
yep, I got one up here too.
Okay. And so my question for you, John, or for Christy, is since you are now Public Disclosure Request Central, how's that working?
It's busy.
Yeah, it's busy. I can tell you that we actually we're in the process of hiring a new paralegal because our public records paralegal ended up going on to another position with the state, if I recall right, or
City of Olympia.
to the City of Olympia, doing I think similar work. But in any event, we're in the place of filling that. I'll tell you that if I had if I was able to make a wish, I'd make a wish for a little bit more resources into that unit, because there's still a lot of work that's being done by the independent offices to gather and collect records and so forth. Overall, though, I continue to hear positive feedback from the offices and the departments about the support that they're getting from the unit. So anecdotally, I feel like it's going well.
Very good. Christy, did you have anything to add? Or no? Okay. I'll start with Gary. Any questions, Gary? Or?
Yeah, yes, I do. Mr. Prosecutor, how many FTEs do you have that we take the funding out of the treatment sales tax?
The the treatment sales tax isn't tied to specific FTEs. We bill that. We have a billable rate, and so
Yeah,
we
it's a
track
billable rate.
time and hours. And so I could do the math for you. I don't have that in front of me. I could do the math for you and tell you,
No,
basically how many
that's fine.
FTEs that might cover.
I would just like to make sure that anything associated that is billable, the TST is coming through just because it takes pressure off the current expense budget. So, and then some of your, under your challenges, like on the second page there under challenges, you've got a couple items that could, some of the funding, I suppose, could be billed to the CARES money, and I'm just hoping that is taking place. Whether you got stuff so you could work remotely, or some of the aggravations and hence cost of additional FTE time that went into social distancing, for an example, or whatever it was. I'm hoping we're getting some compensation back out of the CARES fund to cover that.
Yes, in fact, we just, my leadership, I just put a note out to them that we're going to do kind of a final inventory, because I know that the time's starting to expire on the CARES funding. We're going to do a final inventory to see if there's any other additional equipment that we could possibly need through the end of the year and going in as long as COVID's continuing. Most of what we've obtained so far has been equipment, like you mentioned, to be able to, for people to work from home. And I think we'll have some more things. We've learned a lot about working from home and some of the equipment needs around that. So I think we'll have a little bit more, but we're looking at that. The other thing I wanted to mention to you on TST is we're being very vigilant to remind lawyers to continue to bill their time. But one of the things you might notice if there's a reduction in the amount billed to TST, particularly since COVID set in, is because we haven't been able to file this big group of cases, and a lot of those cases would otherwise be cases where we might be billing TST time to. There's this big kind of backlog of cases that we haven't been able to bill for because we haven't been able to work the cases. Once we attack that backlog, as we start to move out of COVID, I actually am expecting you're going to see a substantial increase in the TST billing back to normal, or perhaps even higher than what was expected, depending on how this plays out. So don't be too alarmed by a temporary reduction. It's only because of the slowdown in our ability to work our cases, to work those TST eligible cases.
Okay, thank you very much for that. On the ITA calendar, are you ending up with, again, enough billable time against TST as that starts to escalate? And
well, that money actually comes from the BHA now, I think, and actually I don't know what that acronym
Yeah, the
stands
acronym
for.
changes. So we also known as BHO.
Yeah,
The Behavioral Health Administration.
Right, the behavioral health piece of it is actually who funds that. And, right now we're covering it, but that's why I was kind of putting a placeholder in that for a future conversation, because there's a number of beds that are due to go online in the not too distant future. And so I'm anticipating there might be another increase in workload. In that case, we'll come back and say, hey, we might need some additional funding from the BHA to help us with the new capacity that's being put online.
okay, well, that's kind of all I have in that regard, as long as we're watching those other funds and trying to take the load off the current expense fund. That's kind of my main concern. I want to compliment you for thinking ahead on that stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Menzer, go ahead, sir.
I got a question about what Gary was just asking about. Maybe it's for Robin, but when this device that was described about prosecutors billing time in pieces to TST, and Gary was talking about, Commissioner was trying to talk about taking the expense off or the burden off general fund. How does that, like, what's the mechanism by how that works? Like, how does then the general fund
It's already
benefit
embedded.
when we've already, if it's not tied to an FTE, we've paid the FTE out of the general fund. Turns out that FTE is billing TST for more time than maybe they thought because the cases, there's more work there or whatever. How does that flow work?
So it's my understanding that what happens in the prosecutor's office is that the attorneys are tracking their time and now entering them into the Eden system. So their time is direct billed to TST instead of going through the general fund. And what we might see happen if they're not able to bill TST right now is a heavier burden on the general fund appropriation. So one of the things,
go ahead.
one of the things we'll have to do is monitor and ensure that the prosecutor's got sufficient general fund. And then there's going to be some catch up, if I understand, in the long run.
It sounds like what you're describing is there's an automatic mechanism that would, depending on how much they build the TST, then the general fund would go up or down just automatically to backfill that particular FTE's pay.
That's right. And we need to, again, make sure he's got sufficient budget for that.
Okay, good. Well, I wasn't sure the cash flowed in that kind of a fluid way or flexible way. So that's good.
Right. And the direct billing is somewhat new for the prosecutor's office. And I just want to say, I appreciate so much that they've worked with us and financial services to make that work.
My only other comment, John, was that it looks like you've omitted in your 2021 challenges list trying to fill the shoes of one of your prosecutors that just left, Mr. Powers. That's going to be a struggle for your office, and good luck with that.
Thank you. It is a challenge. Jim was a huge loss. Of course, his retirement was well-deserved and well-earned, but in terms of institutional knowledge and so forth, it was a big loss. But I continue to use Jim as the model for which I ask my deputy prosecutors to aspire to be, a real champion for justice.
It will be missed. All right, is that any other comments or questions from anybody of the prosecutor? Go ahead, Robin.
I just wanted to mention that as you look forward and do this inventory about what else you might need from the COVID-19 funds, please get that to Jenica or me as soon as possible, because we've pretty much allocated all the money we have out. So if you have something else you need, I need to create an earmark for capacity.
Okay, we'll do that, Robin, for sure.
Yeah, related to that, the window is going to close next week, the end of next week. So the sooner the better. So I do have a comment and a question, if I may. So the first comment is, I think the prosecutor's office get the gold star on all the presentations as they come under their previous budget by 50,000. So kudos to your office.
Thank you.
Actually, it's a fact. So I do have a question on your priority two, the victim advocate. And you stated that either you would like to extend that position to the end of 2021 or remove the end date. Is that right?
Yes.
So in your 10-year financial plan, you have the ending fund balance in 2021 to 422,000 thereabouts. You stated that, and then I see is reducing the ending fund balance. Is that an assumption that that position will continue on?
Yes, the plan has the assumption that the position continues.
Okay.
Which is why I'm being guarded about whether we'll continue to fund it or not until we actually see what the impact COVID has on that fund and so forth.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
And actually, Romero, I'm glad you asked me that question because it reminded me of something in that we actually had a victim advocate position in the fund that went vacant. And the reality is we're actually exchanging, we're using funding that was allocated to that position to fund this legal advocate. So the net expense in the advocate fund is not the full FTE. I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that, but I did want to mention that we're trying to be frugal in terms of and strategic in terms of how we use these resources.
Okay. Thank you.
Prosecutor Thunheim, thank you very much. And the same with Christy Peters. Thank you for joining us. And Elizabeth Petrich, Heidi Frahota, and Susan Strong. Thank you very much. Good presentation.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
Appreciate it.
And now we're going to move on to the public defense. If Patrick
No.
O'Connor, the director, is ready.
Public defense is until 3:30. We can probably check with them if they're available.
Oh, okay. I thought we were pushing it. Okay. Yeah, let's check and see if he's available.
Yeah, give us 5 minutes.
Sure, we'll take a 5-minute recess. Thank you. See you, John. Kidding.
3, 2, 1.
Okay. So, are we ready?
You are on, Commissioner.
You're on. Go ahead.
All right, welcome back. This is the presentation on the budget from the Public Defense. And we have Public Defense Director, Patrick O'Connor, and the Finance, Jose Vargas. Nice to see you again, Jose. And we have Maya. How do you pronounce your last name, Maya? Or Mia? How to pronounce both your names?
It's Pagnata, Commissioner.
Okay. And is it Mia or Maya?
Mia.
And is Larry with us? No?
No, Commissioner, it's just Jose, Mia, and myself today.
Mia and myself, okay. All right, you're on. We'll go through, and this is being live streamed on YouTube. So if you use any acronyms, please spell them out for the public. And we may ask some very basic questions just to get information out as well. So who's going to give the presentation? Are you doing it, Pat?
I am, yes. And good afternoon, Commissioners. I will share my screen here and walk through the slides, but I'll start with good afternoon. My understanding, I'm the last to present today. I'm sure it's been a long week, so bear with me and hang in there because I'm sure you're all exhausted. And let me go ahead.
What are you saying is the best for last?
I'll give you a metaphor, Patrick.
That's for you to
At the end of the Santa Claus parade is Santa Claus. They don't put him at the beginning. They put him at the end. It's the best. It's the best. So here you are.
Okay, I appreciate it. No pressure. So again, good afternoon, Commissioners. I feel like we just saw each other since presented the State of Public Defense last week. So we'll highlight some of the things that we went over and share that with the public. And obviously, at any point, feel free to chime in with any questions that you may have. So I'm Patrick O'Connor. I'm the director of the Thurston County Public Defender's Office. And what I'm sharing with you now is sort of a general scope of what we do here at Public Defense. We have a mission statement here at Public Defense, and that's to defend and protect our clients' constitutional rights, one person at a time. And our clients are guaranteed that representation that the county provides them due to the U.S. and Washington State Constitution. We provide indigent public defense, so anybody who qualifies for our services falls below the federal poverty guidelines for the appointment of counsel, which is the majority of the individuals that do pass through our criminal justice system. We serve clients in adult superior court, adult district court, and our juvenile court. We also provide direct representation for parents facing termination of parental rights, as well as representation in Involuntary Treatment Act proceedings. We also provide additional representation for clients for juveniles, for example, in truancy proceedings, as well as adults facing child support enforcement. So one thing that I will say just briefly about my staff, their commitment to our mission has never been tested greater than the period of the past few months in COVID. So I'm sure you're all aware, and probably every office and department has presented on. This has just been an unbelievably trying year, stressful year, but also a year in which I think we've seen a lot of opportunities too, especially in the criminal justice system, to maybe do things differently going forward. But this is just an acknowledgement of my staff and how proud I am of how they've performed under the hardest circumstances imaginable, frankly. Oh, our next slide is an overview of our budget. Public Defense is primarily, as you can see, a general fund department. We are funded almost exclusively by general fund dollars. The state of Washington provides almost 4% support to public defense, but the rest is absorbed by the county. So as you can see, we divided this into two categories, general fund and treatment sales tax. I'll do a brief overview of general fund first at the top of the slide. You'll see our 2019 actual FTEs and expenditures. Personnel is certainly makes up the majority of our budget. Our other category are the other things it takes to run a public defender's office. As I like to say, public defense isn't just a lawyer standing next to you, it's a full defense. So the same resources that you would expect to have if you went out and spent $10,000 on an attorney, the county is required to fund our office to provide experts, investigative services, all those sorts of things. As you can see, it's roughly about half of our budget for those obligations, in addition to paying for contract counsel that works outside of our office to represent individuals that present conflict of interest issues, legal issues, to direct representation from the staff attorneys in our office. Tracking right along at our 2020 budget, second quarter revised, you can see we went down 1 FTE as a result of COVID and revenue loss. Earlier this year, we had one of our longest term defense attorney retire. He'd been with our office for 27, almost 28 years. He retired at the beginning of the year. I froze that position in anticipation of COVID-related budget cuts, and we did lose that position. So you can see the reduction there to 37.84. There's not 0.84 of a person here. It's rounded up and below with the TST graph or chart, and I'll explain that here in a second. But so as you can see, we had 4.5 in our personnel budget in 2020. Went down a little bit in our other services, and we reduced some of our contracting obligations and anticipated costs with sending direct representations out to our conflict counsel because we were taking more cases internally. And 2021, our proposed budget, and I'll talk about our priorities. We only have 2. As you can see, our personnel budget was down from 4.5 to 4.2, so that's a reduction. That position, according to the guidelines set forth by the Board of County Commissioners, was eliminated in our budget exercise, and we are facing some struggles there, I think, in 21 that I'll talk about here in a little bit. But circling back to 2020 for a minute, as I presented to the board last week, our current forecast has us about 95, a little over 95% spent for this year. So we do anticipate some savings. I do really appreciate the board allowing us the opportunity we were originally facing 2 FTE reductions and eliminations, and the board was allowed us to reduce that to just 1. And that's a defense attorney, and that was greatly appreciated. We do anticipate some savings, but I think as this board knows, and as county manager and the assistant county manager know, our department is particularly challenging in forecasting costs, and that's just the nature of our work. But at this point, we do anticipate having some savings this year, but the next few months are very crucial to how close we are to our forecast. Just turning our attention to the treatment sales tax, about 1.16 of our entire FTEs, our entire staff is funded. It's sort of a collective FTE of resource attorneys that we assign to each treatment court. Personnel, that's 184,000. So we've undergone quite an effort over the past couple of years to raise our treatment sales tax revenues, and I'm very proud and happy with the work that's been done by our staff attorneys to really capture the time they spend working on direct representations that's TST related. And in addition to that, the other category that you see there are an example of that would be our contract attorneys that are doing the same work, but due to a conflict of interest, we were not allowed to represent them. They work in furtherance of treatment sales tax as well, and we were able to get them to capture that time as well, just as our attorneys are doing. Our 2020 revised budget for treatment sales tax is tracking at the bottom, just slight increases, and nothing major there. But in 2021, our proposed FTE and expenditures, you do see that there is an additional FTE added And that's in our priority one. We made a proposal to the Treatment Sales Tax Advisory Committee to fund a position here in our office to perform social work. And my understanding earlier this week, they're supportive of that. So I'll pause for a second and see if there's any questions from the board.
Any questions yet? Gary?
I don't know about questions as much as I want to compliment Patrick because I was here before he got here taking over, and it is a joy to listen to you make a presentation, and I just want to tell you that. And I don't know why this has happened, but when you made your presentation before, I had a commitment I had to run out on, so I don't want you to think for a minute that I am not very supportive and appreciate what you've done over these last few years. Thank you.
Ty, anything?
Nope, I'm good so far.
Okay, well, I will say it's kind of on the heels of what Gary just said, but in your opening statement about your mission statement, you talked about the caliber of the people that you have working for you, and you have really turned that department around as has Jose. And I must add, even though that Larry Jefferson didn't hear that, for the public to know that in May of this year, he was awarded the Daniel Bigelow Award. He's a recipient of that award, and from the Thurston County Bar Association. And that's a highly coveted, it's not, you don't win it. It's not a lottery. You're awarded that. And so I have a lot of respect for Larry to begin with, but you've got a highly functioning crew to include Ms. Pagnotta. You just have a great team. So I'm very impressed. I'm very happy with what you've done over the last 3 years.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Robin, I think you had your hand up there. If you had a question, I want to make sure you.
I just wanted to write on the comments you're already hearing. You know, I've been with the county 10 years now, and I want to say that even though the public defense budget is difficult to forecast, that as a team, you and Jose are just doing an excellent job of navigating that and actually managing this budget. And it is truly a pleasure to work with you and your team. So thank you for the financial management aspect that you bring to this.
Well, yeah, thank you, Robin, and thank you, commissioners, for the kind words. As you all know, as leaders, you know, your success is the byproduct of everyone around you, and I'm no more example of that than anybody else. You hire really good people, you get them the tools that they need to do their job, and you frankly stay out of their way, right? So
yeah, you do.
I'm blessed.
I have more questions, but I'm gonna wait till after you get to the rest of the presentation. So go ahead.
Sure.
Thank you, Robin.
So this is just a highlight a list of challenges, probably no different than some of these and a lot of other offices and departments. You know, employee safety early on in COVID, you know, we took a very firm approach in making sure that we kept our employees safe. And probably the second week of March, you know, I asked myself, how do we do public defense with COVID? How can we do this job and have to maintain 6 feet of social distance from our clients, from the court, from each other here in the office? And so that's, I think, somewhat uniquely challenging for us as public defenders with our clients, and just given the nature of the work that we do. By nature, we are professionals that like to get close to our clients, and we really had to do a lot of change there to keep everybody safe, keep our clients safe, and keep our other stakeholders safe that we're working around. So incredibly challenging, but also you know, opportunities in there to do things differently. You know, with technology and a teleworking schedule that we've developed. And I thought Robin made a good comment at a meeting earlier this morning, and if I misquote it, please forgive me, but it was the takeaway was endure, or not endure, but adapt. And I'm going to use that because that sort of encapsulates what I feel like we've done. General operations, we've had to, change just as everyone else, how we do business. We were closed to the public. So for a public defender's office to be closed to thousands of clients that they couldn't come to our office for a handful of months, it's really challenging while their criminal cases are pending, if they were out of custody. So, communication, as I note, as another challenge, was an incredible challenge and continues to be frank. It's challenging. A lot of our clients don't have phones, for example, or stable housing. So it's really difficult to keep in communication, especially throughout COVID. One of the highlights, I think, for us, though, is to be able to pivot and continue to pivot at each little milestone. And sometimes each milestone through COVID was every week, if not every other day. Certainly in the beginning, it was a new challenge, a new pivot, a new adaptation every 3 days. As we were all changing, the entire justice system had to make those changes week to week. And so that certainly was challenging. Probably, as I highlight here, the inability to conduct jury trials, as you probably heard from the other stakeholders that if they presented to you, I don't know if they have, that the inability to conduct jury trials has been very challenging. To go from mid-March of this year to the beginning of July with a complete suspension of jury trials in the criminal justice system was certainly a challenge for us, for our clients that wanted to exercise that constitutional right. But it was suspended for obvious reasons and understandable reasons. But there certainly is a cause and effect there that I think we're all stakeholders are dealing with now, the effects of which is we have cases that are backed up and we have a lot of backlog to work our way through. There's been a lot of work done by the stakeholders to try to develop plans to address those backlogs, but for us and our ethical obligations. So each and every public defender here has an ethical obligation to advocate on behalf of their client. And if their client is insisting on trial and a jury trial, it's been a challenge to say they have to wait, and you have to get in line to have your case heard by a jury. As the Board of County Commissioners is certainly aware that we are taking some steps to try to address that backlog and provide some additional space with the off-site trial facility, and that frankly can't come soon enough. And I'm excited to see if maybe we can meet that target next month, because the sooner we set that up, the better it'll be for the entire justice system as a whole, not just in Superior Court, because District Court has paused their trials until the opening of that facility. One of the other big challenges, understandably, we worked hand in hand with corrections throughout this time. We are uniquely partnered, I think, most of the time, as I like to say, because, we both work in that facility. Our staff are in there and have been in there every day throughout COVID to represent clients. And it's been challenging. It's slowed down communication. Understandably, the jail has restrictions on what they can and can't do based on COVID. Obviously, it's well documented. We recently had an outbreak in the jail, but we continue to try to be creative with the jail and see if we can get as much access to the clients as we can, and that's ethically required. Teleworking, I'll just be brief here. It's been incredibly successful. I think a lot of traditional thought maybe was a little bit adverse to teleworking, but due to COVID, we really had to change how we do public defense, and we never operate and haven't with more than 50% of staff here in the office at any time. And if you'd have told me that a year ago, I probably would have said, not for public defense. That just doesn't work for us. Maybe some other business, but not what we do. But it's been incredibly successful and also incredibly challenging. And there's been challenges too. We have staff that now the kids are getting back into school, and that's incredibly challenging for staff. I know as a parent too, I was just there this morning, and it's really challenging, but I really appreciate the board's support, and Romero has been able to voice that on your behalf, the support that the commissioners have provided to employees that are having to work and teleeducate. And I can't tell you how much that means to at least my staff, and I'm sure other county staff as well. Virtual court proceedings have been a challenge as well for all of us to get used to. It's still hard for me to sometimes to get used to that court's not in court. That court can be done just as we're having this meeting here as well. But it's at a necessity, and we've had some successes with it as well. And I really appreciate the board's support on updating the infrastructure, specifically in Superior Court. The timing couldn't have been better to meet the challenges of COVID. So I'll pause until I go to the next slide. Anybody has any questions?
I don't think so. We'll go ahead and get you through the both priorities, and we'll have questions.
Okay. So, I took an approach, commissioners, this year in, being strategic, understanding what the board has asked us to do and the exercise that we just went through with the budget reduction and losing a staff attorney, and tried to be very selective. Certainly, we have a lot of needs, as I'm sure other offices and departments do as well, but I didn't want to be tone deaf and make a lot of policy level requests that in the middle of a budget crisis that I didn't think would be funded. But our number one priority request is B2403, and that's to finally fund our department a full-time social worker. The Washington State Bar Association standards for indigent defense offices in the state of Washington recommend public defender offices employ social workers, multiple workers. We've never employed one full-time FTE. And so knowing the budget restraints that the county is facing, if I were to make this request to the county, this would be a direct general fund hit. So my review of the treatment sales tax eligibility and criteria, I presented this opportunity to the Treatment Sales Tax Advisory Committee, and I believe they're making a recommendation to the board to fund this position. This position will be incredibly valuable for our department when we have clients that have identified substance use disorders or mental illness. We can have a social worker embedded in our office to take immediate direct referrals from attorneys to connect that individual with local service providers. We're working up all different ways to make those connections, but that's our number one priority. And I think you're going to get that recommendation from the advisory committee. And again, that would be funded through treatment sales tax and not a hit to the general fund. So that's our number one priority. Our second priority is a modest request of the general fund. And this is one that has been a long-standing issue in our office. The law requires that anybody arrested under suspicion of DUI has the right to call an attorney. And we, for years and years, ever since I first started, would be on call every week or on a rotating basis to take those calls at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, as sometimes DUIs tend to happen when bars close. And my ask and the second priority is to finally fund and compensate the attorneys for their time spent during that week. It's a funding request of $13,000, and that breaks down to $250 a week for an attorney in our office to be compensated for their time. As you could probably imagine, that is not a very popular unpaid duty by my attorneys, to get 3 or 4 DUI calls in the middle of the night and wake their kids up and have to plan around that. And so I'm asking for a modest priority funding of $13,000 annually to fund our on-duty public defender that takes calls throughout the week. And I can how I got to that number is it's comparable to the prosecutor's on-call prosecutor weekly compensation, which my staff are aware of and have reminded me very much that they don't get paid for it. Yes.
In a couple of occasions, I bet.
Yes. Yep. That's
Is that it? Are you done?
that's it. Yep,
Okay.
done.
I think it's a fair, like you said, it's modest. It's a modest request, and I think it's fair compensation. But what I was thinking was, and I think I've answered my question. You kind of answered for me, that if I am on call, whether I get a call or not, that is compensatory. That's time, correct?
Correct.
I'm getting compensated for it. And I was thinking, well, if I get called out at 2 a.m., but it's a mental health call, can we attribute that to TST money and get reimbursed? But no, because it's regardless of whatever it is, they're getting that for being just on call.
Right. And the primary calls there, Commissioner, are DUI calls, because the statute DUI places an obligation on the officer, conducting that arrest, that if a client invokes and wishes to speak to an attorney before they submit to the breath test, that the officer has that duty under the law to make take a reasonable step to put them in contact with an attorney. And they all have our number, so they know what the on-call duty number is when they call the public defender's office, and then they satisfy that legal obligation. But it's an opportunity cost. I think as you point out, you may not get a call on a Tuesday night, but if you had plans on a Tuesday night with your family or friends, you can't do that. You need to stay home to take the calls if one comes in. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Mensah, any questions or comments?
I don't think so. I'm intimately familiar with that. I used to do the on-call phone, and so I understand all about that. And I will. It's news that the TST funding might be recommended for the social work. I know the public defense has needed that for a while from whatever funding source. I think it's a very valuable position, and if that comes through as a recommendation from TST, then I would think that would make sense to me.
Did you get on-call pay in Alaska?
It's funny. We did not so even I'm very proud of the Alaska Public Defender, and I will defend almost everything they did as top notch. But we did not provide that service. The statute might have been worded differently in Alaska on that, and people could open the phone book and call an attorney who may or may not answer the phone. Some people in the phone book, in an effort to get clients, would say, I'm available 24/7. But the public defender did not take it on. We did not have that phone thing.
Okay.
So, it's great to have it. But
it looks like Gary left the room, did he?
Yeah, he had to leave. Thank you.
Okay. So, Robin, did you have your hand up?
Yes, but I'm sorry. I was so engrossed in the conversation that I forgot what I was. Oh, no, I remember. Almost totally forgot. Patrick, the Public Defense Social Work FTE through TST, would that be a second one? Because I seem to recall that there was one. Or maybe it wasn't an FTE, it was a contract.
Right. Yes. So there was a portion of treatment sales tax that was funding mitigation work. And so we'll be pivoting on that. That mitigation work was subsidized, frankly, by treatment sales tax. It's still part of an obligation on defense counsel to mitigate a case to present to a judge for sentencing or to present to a prosecutor, but that funding from TST would be removed to fund the social worker position that they're proposing. The defense attorneys may still make a professional service request to me for mitigation, but it's that they have reduced that line item, or reduced it by striking it basically, and funding the position. Yeah,
I seem to remember a contractor, Brenda.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Right. And so that's those services will still be available. It's just not going to be a treatment sales tax billable, essentially.
Okay. Thank you.
Romero, did you have anything?
No, sir. I just want to echo what Commissioner Edwards stated. Good job, Patrick.
Excellent job. Director Patrick O'Connor, thank you very much. Jose Vargas, good to see you, sir. And
Thank you.
Minita, thank you for joining us as well. Was there anything else from anybody? No? No. Any final requests of us, Patrick?
No, I really appreciate your time. And like I said, I know it's been probably a long day and a long week, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. It's been a long week. And so right before we sign off, I just wanted to say, remind the public that we did Treasurer's Office, Assessor's Office, the Auditor's Office, Human Resources, Central Services, IT, Commissioner's Office, non-departmental, other funds, pretrial services, Sheriff's Office, and corrections of the coroner, Superior Court, Juvenile Court, Clerk's Office, District Court, Prosecuting Attorney, and now Public Defense. And so I've got to say, Robin, thank you so much. Olivia Aldman, thank you. Denise Doty, thank you. Patty Rosetto, thank you for all this orchestration, all the paperwork that went on behind the scenes. And thank you, Romero, too. Did you have any final comment, Ty? No?
I just wanted to say that my kids have been watching the new Muppet thing on TV, and they've got the weasel. They call him Joe from Legal, and he always makes lawyer jokes and then laughs really loud. He's really funny, but he made a joke about like the worst thing you can do, and his comparison was like scheduling a deposition on a Friday, and then he laughs. Ah! So Hux, I appreciate you sticking out the final Friday afternoon presentation, Pat.
Yeah.
Yes, the Santa
Thank you all.
Claus.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you
And
all.
we're signing off. Bye-bye. Have a good